The first snow of December came to Boudreaux, Louisiana, not as a gentle dusting, but as a silent, suffocating siege. It was an unnatural cold for this part of the country, a bitter Arctic breath that crept in from the Gulf and settled over the cypress swamps, freezing the black water and turning the Spanish moss into brittle chandeliers of ice. They said it was a once-in-a-generation storm. They were wrong. It was a shroud. On the evening of December 10th, 2008, a man named Silas Blackwood, a trapper whose face was a testament to 70 years of hard living, was checking his lines along a secluded dirt track that connected the village of Boudreaux to the main highway. The world was a monochrome canvas of white snow and black trees, the only sound the crunch of his boots and the low moan of the wind. It was around 9 at night, the darkness absolute, when the beam of his headlamp caught something at the base of an ancient cypress tree. It was a splash of color in the white landscape, a dark, defiant red. He moved closer, his breath pluming in the frigid air. It wasn't a piece of cloth, it wasn't a discarded can. It was a human foot, severed cleanly at the ankle. It lay there in the snow, a grotesque, surreal artifact. It was small, delicate. The toenails were painted a deep, lustrous crimson, the polish chipped but still vibrant. It was a woman's foot, a foot that had once worn high heels, that had once danced to music. Now it was just a frozen piece of meat, a gruesome punctuation mark at the end of a story he didn't want to know. I got the call at my desk in the small, cramped sheriff's substation in Boudreaux. My name is Jack Dubois. I was a detective, a title that felt far too grand for this backwater parish where the most exciting thing that usually happened was a gator wandering into someone's backyard. I'd been exiled here from New Orleans a year earlier, a penance for a case that had gone sideways, for a mistake that had left a good cop dead and my career in ashes. Boudreaux was my purgatory, a place of stifling humidity, buzzing insects, and a slow, creeping boredom that was its own kind of hell. The drive out to the scene was a slow crawl through the blinding snow. The world outside my patrol car was a churning vortex of white. When I finally arrived, the scene was already a mess. A couple of deputies were trying to keep a small crowd of curious locals at bay, their footprints a chaotic web in the pristine snow around the cypress tree. The old trapper, Silas, stood off to the side, his face pale, his eyes wide. The foot lay where he had found it, already being dusted by fresh snow. I knelt down, the cold seeping through the knees of my pants. The cut was clean, precise, not the work of an animal. This was a blade, a heavy one, a saw maybe. The flesh was frozen solid. The ME would later estimate it had been out here for at least a few hours, maybe longer. The crimson nail polish was the only thing that felt human. It was a small, defiant touch of vanity in the face of such brutal, anonymous violence. It told me something about the victim. She was a woman who cared about her appearance, a woman who probably didn't do a lot of heavy manual labor, and it told me she was almost certainly local. That particular shade of polish, Bayou Blood, was a bestseller at the only drugstore in a 50-mile radius. We searched the area for hours, our flashlights cutting feeble paths through the swirling snow. We were looking for the rest of her. A leg, an arm, a torso, a head. But we found nothing. The snow was a relentless accomplice, covering everything, erasing every clue, every track. It was like the world itself was trying to bury this crime. The only question that mattered, the question that began to echo in the cold, empty chambers of my mind was, where? Where was the rest of her? For 5 days she was just Jane Doe, a severed foot in an evidence locker. We had no missing persons reports that fit the profile. The village of Boudreaux was a small, tight-knit community, a place where everyone knew everyone else's business. A missing woman should have raised an alarm, but there was only silence. Then on the 15th of December, an old woman named Eleanor Song came into the station. Her face was a mask of worry. She said her daughter, Lily Mae Thorne, hadn't been seen in over 2 weeks, since the 28th of November. Lily Mae lived in Boudreaux with her husband, a fisherman named Caleb, and their young daughter. Mrs. Song said she had tried calling, but Lily Mae's phone went straight to voicemail. She had driven by the house, but no one was ever home. It wasn't entirely unusual. Lily Mae was a free spirit, she said, prone to taking off for a few days after a fight with her husband. But 2 weeks? That was too long. I asked her for a description of her daughter. 28 years old, pretty with long brown hair, and then she said it. The words that made the ice in my veins crystallize. She always painted her toenails, Mrs. Song said, her voice trembling. A dark, blood-red color. She said it made her feel glamorous. A DNA sample from Mrs. Song confirmed it the next day. The foot in the snow belonged to her daughter, Lily Mae Thorne. The missing person case was now a homicide, a brutal dismemberment murder. The first thing we did was bring in the husband, Caleb Thorne. He was 33, a quiet, stoic man with the weathered face and calloused hands of a lifelong fisherman. He sat in the interrogation room, his gaze fixed on the table, his demeanor unnervingly calm. He told us the same story his mother-in-law had. He and Lily Mae had gotten into a heated argument on the night of the 28th. It was about her running around, he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. He suspected she was having an affair. She had stormed out of the house and he hadn't seen her since. He thought she would come back, he said. She always did. His alibi for the night the foot was found was flimsy. He claimed he was at home with his 4-year-old daughter, Abigail. A 4-year-old can't verify an alibi. The house was unnervingly neat, the kind of clean that feels less like tidiness and more like an erasure of evidence. The little girl, Abigail, was a silent, watchful presence, her eyes large and dark in her small, pale face. She wouldn't speak. She just stared at me, a look of old, deep fear in her eyes. The neighbors confirmed the story of a volatile marriage. They were used to hearing loud, angry arguments coming from the Thorne house, fights about money, fights about Lily Mae's flirtatious nature. They said she had been asking Caleb for a divorce, but he had refused. Then Caleb gave us a name, a man named Bo Landry. He was a handsome, charismatic drifter who had been working on a construction crew in the area for a few months. Caleb said he had heard the whispers, had seen the way Bo looked at his wife. He was sure they were having an affair. The name Bo Landry was on everyone's lips. The locals had seen him and Lily Mae together at the diner, at the local bar. Their relationship wasn't a secret. It was a public spectacle, a brazen act of defiance against her husband and the conservative values of the village. And then we discovered that Bo Landry had disappeared. He had packed up his things and left his rented room at the local boarding house at the end of November. Around the same time, Lily Mae had vanished. He was now our prime suspect. The case took a turn for the macabre on the evening of December 16th. A call came in from a pair of teenagers who had been drinking beer down by the river. They had found a black plastic garbage bag snagged on a log in a shallow ditch. Inside the bag was a human head. It was in a state of mild decomposition, but the long brown hair, the delicate features, were still recognizable. It was Lily Mae. 2 weeks later, another piece of her surfaced. A fisherman found a severed arm bone, part of a hand, floating in the lower reaches of the same river. The killer was taunting us. He was scattering her across the landscape piece by piece, as if he were trying to erase her not just from life, but from the very geography of the place. The investigation into Caleb Thorne intensified. A neighbor came forward. She had seen Caleb carrying a heavy, wrapped object out of his house in the pre-dawn darkness of December 10th, the same morning the foot was found. She had thought it was strange, but hadn't wanted to get involved. Caleb claimed it was just firewood and some garden waste. His explanation felt weak, rehearsed. On the 29th of December, we got a tip. Caleb Thorne was at the bus station, a heavy backpack slung over his shoulder. We caught him just as he was about to board a bus headed for Texas. He claimed he was going to look for work, that the pressure of the investigation was too much. We didn't believe him. We took him into custody. The real break, the one that cracked the case wide open and plunged me into a nightmare from which I have never fully woken, came on New Year's Eve. Caleb's daughter, Abigail, had been staying with her grandmother since her mother's disappearance. She had developed a high fever. She was delirious. Her grandmother called me, frantic. She said Abigail was talking in her sleep, mumbling. I drove over to the house. I sat by the little girl's bed and listened. Her voice was a small, feverish whisper. Her eyes were closed, her small body trembling, and she was repeating the same 3 words over and over again, a horrifying, nonsensical nursery rhyme. "Daddy cooked Mommy," she whispered. "Daddy cooked Mommy, Daddy cooked Mommy." The words hung in the air, a child's innocent, horrifying pronouncement. It was the key, the terrible, unthinkable key. It explained everything: the missing body parts, the unnervingly clean house, Caleb's desperate attempt to flee, armed with the little girl's fever dream confession. We went back to Caleb's house with a new warrant and a team of forensic experts. This time we weren't just looking, we were excavating. We tore the place apart. In the frozen, hard-packed dirt of the backyard, in an area that had once been a pig pen, we found them. Tiny fragments of human bone. Some of them had black scorch marks, a sign they had been subjected to incredibly high temperatures. I was the one who went into the kitchen. I was drawn to it, to a large black cast iron pot that sat on the stove, scrubbed clean. I was obsessed, haunted by the little girl's words. I ran a gloved finger along the inside of the pot. It felt clean, but then using a high-intensity forensic light, I saw it, a faint, almost invisible residue at the bottom, a greasy dark stain that had soaked into the very pores of the iron. The lab later confirmed it. It was human tissue. The net was closing. We tracked down Bo Landry in a town just across the Texas border. He was terrified. He admitted to the affair with Lily May. He said they had had a fight on the afternoon of the 28th of November. She was talking about leaving her husband for him, and he had gotten cold feet. He told her he wasn't ready for that kind of commitment. He had left her, angry and upset, and had driven straight to Texas to get away from the mess he had created. His alibi was solid. Witnesses and gas station receipts placed him hundreds of miles away at the time of the murder. We had it all: the bone fragments, the residue in the pot, the daughter's cryptic testimony, the lack of any other viable suspect. We brought Caleb Thorne back into the interrogation room. We laid out the evidence piece by piece. We told him what his daughter had said. For a long time, he just sat there, his face a stone mask. Then, something inside him seemed to break. A single tear traced a path through the grime on his cheek, and he began to talk. His voice was a low, dead monotone, as if he were recounting a story that had happened to someone else. He said he had come home early on the afternoon of the 28th of November. He found his daughter, Abigail, alone in the house, crying. She had bruises on her arms. She told him that Mummy's friend, the man she knew as Bo, had been there. She said he had gotten angry that he had hurt her. Caleb said something inside him had snapped. A lifetime of quiet resentment, of simmering jealousy, of feeling like a failure in his own home had boiled over into a white-hot, uncontrollable rage. He confronted Lily May in the kitchen. She was getting ready to go out, her face made up, a defiant, mocking look in her eyes. When she tried to push past him to leave the house, he grabbed a heavy meat cleaver from the butcher block, and he killed her. His confession up to that point was a depressingly familiar tale of domestic violence, but what he said next was something that would forever be seared into my memory, a new benchmark for the depths of human depravity. He said that after he killed her, he knew he had to get rid of the body, so he dismembered her right there on the floor of his own kitchen. And then, he said, he had an idea, an act of revenge so monstrous, so diabolical that it defied all comprehension. He wanted her to disappear completely. He wanted to punish her even in death, and he wanted to punish her mother, the woman who he felt had always looked down on him, who had encouraged her daughter's promiscuity. So he cooked her. He took pieces of his wife's flesh and stewed them for hours in the large, black cast-iron pot with onions and potatoes and spices, like some grotesque cannibalistic gumbo. Later that night, he took a container of the stew to his mother-in-law's house. He told her that Lily May had made it for her as a peace offering after their last fight. And Eleanor Song, grieving for her missing daughter, had sat down at her kitchen table and eaten a large bowl of the stew her son-in-law had brought her. She had unknowingly consumed the cooked flesh of her own child. Listening to him recount this, his voice devoid of any emotion, I had to leave the room. I stumbled into the hallway and was violently sick in a trash can. The horror of it was a physical thing, a poison that had entered my own body. Caleb went on to explain how he had disposed of the other body parts. He had buried the burned bones in the backyard. He had thrown the head and the other pieces into the river at different times in different locations, a deliberate attempt to confuse and mislead the investigation. He was arrested and charged with murder, dismemberment, and a litany of other crimes for which the legal system had no adequate name. The court, calling his actions an offense against humanity itself, sentenced him to death. Beau Landry was cleared, but his life was ruined. He was forever known as the man at the center of the cannibal killer case. He left Louisiana and was never heard from again. Eleanor Song, when she was told the truth about the meal her son-in-law had served her, suffered a complete and catastrophic psychotic break. She was committed to a state mental hospital, her mind shattered beyond repair, and little Abigail, the silent witness. She was taken in by relatives in another state. They tried to give her a new life, a new name. But the damage was done. They said she never spoke another word. She lived in a world of profound, unbreachable silence, her large, dark eyes staring at something no one else could see. The case was closed. I had gotten the confession. I had put the monster behind bars, but it felt like a hollow victory. I had not been redeemed. I had only descended further into the darkness. I was haunted by the image of the crimson toenails in the white snow, haunted by the thought of the cast iron pot, and most of all, haunted by the memory of a little girl's feverish, whispered words. "Daddy cooked, Mommy." Months later, after the snow had melted and the swamp had come back to life, I drove out to that lonely stretch of road one last time. I stood by the ancient cypress tree where it had all begun. I looked out at the dark, murky water of the bayou, at the tangled, brooding wilderness that seemed to stretch on forever. And I felt it, the same feeling I had had on that first night. A feeling that the evil in this case was not just the product of one man's twisted mind. It was something older, something that emanated from the land itself, a sickness, a moral rot that seeped up from the mud and poisoned the souls of the people who lived there. I thought about little Abigail, and I realized, with a sudden chilling certainty, that her silence was not just the result of trauma. She was silent because she was still listening. She was listening to the whispers from the swamp, to the dark secrets that the cypress trees kept. And maybe, in the quiet of her own mind, she was still hearing the soft, terrible, unending refrain. A lullaby from hell, sung by the ghosts of Boudreaux.